There was a girl in the music class who never said much. She sat near the back. Always. Not because she was told to, but because that is where people like her end up, when no one makes room at the front. She kept her notebook close, her head down, and she listened more than she spoke. Most people in that room had already decided she was just there to fill a seat. No one had asked her to prove otherwise. No one thought they needed to. The class was not small. There were maybe 20 students, all of them studying under the same teacher, all of them moving through the same pieces, the same exercises, the same expectations, but somewhere along the way, a kind of invisible ranking had formed. The ones who were good sat closer to the front. The ones who were serious got picked for solos. And the rest, the ones the group had quietly decided did not matter much, they stayed in the back and were mostly left alone. She had been in that second group for a while now. It was not something anyone announced out loud. That is the thing about this kind of cruelty. It never comes with a speech. It just lives in the way people look past you, the way your name doesn't come up when good things are being handed out, the way laughter rises in a room the moment someone points at you. She had felt all of it, many times. And each time, she had just gone quiet and kept going. The day it happened started like every other day. The teacher had stepped out for a few minutes, something about a phone call, and the moment the door clicked shut, the room shifted. That is what happens when structure leaves the room. The ones who had been waiting for permission to be unkind finally had it. One of the older students, the kind who wore confidence like a jacket he had borrowed from someone else, walked over to the shelf where the sheet music was kept. He flipped through the folders slowly, like he was looking for something specific. Then, Ismailith, that particular kind of smile. Not warm, not funny, just pleased with itself. He pulled out a piece. It was not just difficult. It was the kind of piece that music students talked about in hushed voices, the kind that advanced players spent months on, the kind that even confident performers hesitated before touching. It had complex timing, difficult transitions, and passages that required both technical precision and something harder to teach. Real feeling. It was not a beginner's piece. It was not an intermediate piece. It was the kind of music that asked everything from the person playing it. He walked over to her and held it out. Here, he said, "Why don't you try this one?" A few people laughed. Not all of them, but enough. The kind of laugh that says, we all know what this is. We all see it, and we are going along with it. So looked up. She looked at him. She looked at the sheet music in his outstretched hand. She took Italiano. She did not say anything clever. She did not smile back or roll her eyes or perform any of the reactions that might have made her look unbothered. She just took it, looked at the first page for a moment, and then set it down on the stand in front of her. The laughter continued a little longer, the way laughter does when it is looking for a reaction and not quite finding one, and then it faded. People went back to what they were doing. She was, once again, ignored. When the teacher came back, the class continued as normal. Nobody mentioned what had happened. Why would they? It was nothing. It was a joke. Just a girl in the back row who had been handed something impossible. What was there to talk about? She stayed after class for a few minutes, alone. She picked up the sheet music again. This time she went through it slowly, page by page, not playing, just reading. Her fingers moved slightly at her side, tracing shapes in the air. Muscle memory already beginning to ask questions. She folded the pages carefully, tucked them into her bag, and left. That night, she did not sleep much. She had a small space at home where she practiced. Not a studio, not anything impressive. Just a corner of a room with enough quiet to concentrate. She set the piece on the stand, sat down, and began. Not from the beginning. She started in the middle, where the hardest part lived. Because she had learned early on that if you save the hard part for later, you never quite get there. You tire yourself out on the easy parts, and then meet the difficulty already exhausted. So she went straight for it. It was hard. That is the honest truth of it. Her hands did not cooperate at first. The timing was strange and unforgiving. There were moments where the piece seemed to push back, like it was telling her she had no business being here. She stopped. She breathed. She started again. An hour passed. Then, another. She was not a girl who gave up. That was not something the people in that music class knew about her. because they had never been curious enough to find out. But she had been practicing since she was small, had pushed through hard things before, had sat with frustration until it became something else. She understood that the moment you want to stop is often the moment right before something starts to open up. So she stayed with it. By midnight, the difficult passage was starting to feel less foreign in her hands. By 2 a.m, she had moved on to the opening, which was deceptively simple and required a lightness of touch that was harder than it looked. By the time the sky outside began to shift from black to the dark blue that comes before morning, she had been through the entire piece more times than she could count. She was tired. Her hands were stiff. Her eyes burned. And she had it. Not mostly. Not good enough for someone who just picked it up. She had it the way you have something when you have been inside it long enough that it stops being a series of steps and becomes a single, continuous thing. She had it memorized. Every note, every pause, every shift and feeling that the piece asked for. She sat there for a moment in the quiet. Outside, a bird started somewhere. Morning was beginning. She had been up all night with a piece of music that had been handed to her as a joke, and now she knew it better than the person who had handed it to her ever would. She put the pages back in her bag. Tomorrow, she was going back to that room, and she was not going to say a word about any of this. She was simply going to play. She walked in the next morning, like she always did. Same bag on her shoulder. Same quiet way of moving through a crowded room without bumping into anyone, without making noise, without asking for space. She found her seat near the back, set her things down, and waited. If anyone noticed anything different about her, they did not show it. Why would they? She was just the girl from yesterday, the one they had handed the impossible piece to as a joke. The joke was already old news. Nobody was thinking about it anymore. That is the thing about people who dismiss others quickly. They also forget quickly. The moment had been entertaining for about 30 seconds, and then it was gone from their minds entirely. But it had not been gone from hers, not for a single hour of the night that had just passed. The class started the same way it always did. The teacher called for attention, ran through a few announcements, and then asked who wanted to go first. A couple of hands went up. The usual ones, the confident ones, the ones who were used to being seen. One of them played. It was good. People nodded. The teacher gave a few notes. Life in that room continued exactly as it always had. Then the teacher asked if anyone else wanted to take the floor. She raised her hand. There was a small pause. Not dramatic, not long, just a half-second where the room had to catch up to what it was seeing. Her hand raised. Her volunteering. That was new. 1 or 2 people exchanged a glance. The student who had handed her the piece the day before looked over from across the room, a faint trace of something on his face. Amusement, maybe, or curiosity. Hard to tell. The teacher nodded. Go ahead. Sis stood up, picked up her bag, and walked to the front. She did not rush. She did not look around at the room. She set her bag down to the side and stood at the instrument, or the stand, or wherever her particular discipline placed her when it was time to perform, and she took one breath. Just one. The quiet kind that nobody else notices but that settles something inside you before you begin. She had no sheet music in her hands. Someone noticed that first. A small murmur moved through the back of the room. Barely a sound. More of a shift in attention. She was going to play from memory, or try to. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe she had forgotten to bring the pages. Maybe this was going to be a disaster and the joke was about to write a second chapter. Se. Begun. The first notes came out, clean and certain. No hesitation, no searching, just the music, landing exactly where it was supposed to land. The opening of the piece, which she had worked on in the early hours of the morning when everything else was silent, had that light touch it required, the kind that makes something sound effortless even though it is not. The room went still in the way that rooms do when something unexpected is happening and nobody wants to be the one who misses it. She moved through the piece. The difficult passage came, the one that lived in the middle, the one with the complicated timing that had pushed back against her hands for the first hour of practice. She did not slow down when she reached it. She did not brace herself, or hesitate or look down at where her hands were going. She just went through it, cleanly. The way you move through something you have lived inside long enough that it no longer feels like a challenge. It feels like yours. At this point, the room was very quiet. The student who had handed her the piece was no longer leaning back in his chair the way he had been a minute ago. He was sitting forward now, arms resting on his knees, watching, not smirking, just watching. The others who had laughed the day before, they were watching too, with the particular expression of people who are realizing, in real time, that they have made an error in judgment. Not a small one. A real one. She kept playing. There is something that happens when a person performs something truly well, not just technically correct, but genuinely felt. The room responds to it before the mind does. Something in the air changes. You stop thinking about the person playing and start thinking about the music itself, and that is when you know it is real. That is what was happening now. People were not watching her anymore. They were listening. There is a difference, and it matters. She reached the final passage. The piece had an ending that required patience. It did not rush toward a finish. It settled into one. The way a long conversation ends, not with a sharp stop, but with a thought that simply finds its resting place. She played it exactly that way. And then it was done. The last note faded. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the teacher, who had been standing to the side with his arms folded and his face unreadable for most of the performance, slowly uncrossed his arms. He looked at her the way you look at someone you are seeing for the first time, even though they have been in your room for weeks. He did not say anything immediately. Hust looked, and that silence, coming from him, said more than applause would have. A few people started clapping, then more. It was not the polite, automatic kind of clapping that fills a room out of habit. It was the kind that starts slowly because people are still catching up to what they just heard. She stood there and received it without performing anything in return. No big smile, no dramatic bow, no look toward the person who had handed her the piece. She just stood quietly and let it happen around her. The teacher walked over and asked, simply, where she had found the time. She said she had practiced last night. He asked if she had known the piece before. She said no. He looked at her for another moment, and then he nodded the kind of nod that is not just acknowledgement but something closer to respect. He told her she would be performing it at the next showcase. Not as a suggestion, as a decision. She nodded back, picked up her bag, and walked to her seat. She did not look at the student who had handed her the piece. She did not need to. He looked at her, though, for a long time after she sat down, he kept glancing over. Not with the easy confidence he usually wore, but with something quieter, something that might have been embarrassment or the beginning of understanding, or both. He did not say anything to her that day. Maybe he did not know what to say. Maybe there was nothing to say that would have landed right. Some moments do not have a good follow-up. You just have to sit with what you did and what it turned out to mean. The class moved on. Other students performed. Notes were given. The hour passed, but something in that room had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Even if no one named it out loud, the invisible ranking that had organized that space for so long. The quiet agreement about who mattered and who did not had a crack in it now. Not broken entirely. These things rarely break, all at once, but cracked, the way something cracks right before it cannot hold its old shape anymore. She packed her things at the end of class, the same way she always did. Slowly, carefully, without rushing. Someone she had never spoken to came up and told her that was incredible. She said, "Thank you." Another person asked how long she'd been playing. So told them they looked surprised. She was not surprised that they were surprised. She had expected it. What she had not expected, and what she let herself feel quietly on the walk home that afternoon, was how good it felt to simply be known for something true, not to be praised, not to be validated, just to be seen for what she actually was. She had not asked for the piece. She had not asked for the joke. She had not asked for any of it. But she had taken what was handed to her as a dismissal and turned it into the clearest statement she had ever made. Not with words, not with argument, but with one night of quiet work and one morning of complete honesty. Some people spend years trying to prove something to a room full of people who were not really paying attention. She had done it in a single performance. And the most remarkable part was not the applause, and not the teacher's nod, and not the cracked expression on the face of the person who had started it all. The most remarkable part was that she had already known, somewhere around 2 in the morning when the last note finally settled right in her hands, that this was how it was going to go. She had known, and she had shown up anyway.